My son said, "Mom, sell your house and move in with us." A month after moving in, I heard him telling the realtor, our house, a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial I had once filled with the noise of a growing family, now felt like a mausoleum. For 35 years, it had been the epicenter of my world. Now, it was just a collection of empty rooms and escalating maintenance costs. My son, Michael, and his wife, Sarah, started their campaign of concern about 6 months after the funeral. It began subtly, with worried glances and gentle suggestions. "This place is so big for just one person, Mom," Michael would say, his hand covering mine with a familiar proprietary warmth. Sarah would nod in agreement, her brow furrowed with carefully practiced sympathy. "We worry about you here all alone. The stairs, the yard work. It's too much." They painted a beautiful picture of an alternative. "Mom, sell the house," Michael had said one Sunday, his voice earnest and persuasive. "Move in with us. We'll take care of you. We can even build a proper in-law suite with the money from the sale. You'll have your own space, but you'll be with family. No more lonely nights." It was a tempting offer, a lifeline thrown to a woman treading water in an ocean of grief. The thought of daily dinners, of hearing my granddaughter Lily practicing her piano, of simply not being alone, it was an irresistible balm for my aching heart. So, I agreed. I let myself be convinced that it was the logical, sensible thing to do. I ignored the faint, traitorous whisper in my gut that mourned the loss of my home, my independence. I told myself it was for the best. The selling process was a whirlwind of emotional and physical labor. Packing up 3 decades of a life was like performing an archaeological dig on my own heart. Each box taped shut felt like a final goodbye to a piece of my past. The house sold quickly in the hot market, and the number on the check was substantial, almost dizzying. True to his word, Michael had a plan. He showed me blueprints for a lovely ground floor extension on their house. It would have its own small living area, a bedroom, and a handicapped accessible bathroom. "Just in case for the future," he'd said with a reassuring smile. To fund it, I wrote them a check. It was for more than half the proceeds from my sale, a sum that made my hand tremble slightly as I signed my name. "It's an investment, Mom," Michael had said, hugging me tightly. "An investment in our family, in your future." The first month was a blur of forced cheerfulness. The construction on the in-law suite hadn't yet begun. They were waiting on permits, they said. I was given the guest room, a small, pleasant space at the back of the house. I tried to make it my own, with a few photos and my favorite armchair, but it felt temporary, like a hotel room. My other belongings, the furniture and boxes I hadn't sold or given away, were stacked in their garage, a silent testament to a life in storage. I tried to be helpful, to fit in. I'd offer to cook, but Sarah would insist she had it covered, steering me out of her gleaming modern kitchen with a polite but firm smile. I'd try to start a conversation, but Michael would often be distracted by his phone, and Sarah by a work call. I spent most of my days reading in my room, the silence here somehow more oppressive than the one in my old house. There, it had been filled with memories. Here, it was filled with the subtle, chilling feeling of being an inconvenience. The collapse came on a Tuesday night, exactly 1 month and 3 days after I'd moved in. I woke up thirsty, my throat dry. I crept out of my room, careful not to make a sound, and padded down the darkened hallway toward the kitchen. As I passed Michael's home office, I heard the low murmur of his voice. The door was slightly ajar, a thin slice of light cutting across the dark hallway floor. I paused, not wanting to disturb him, but then a few words snagged my attention. Prime location, great school district, Michael was saying, his voice low and confidential, the one he used for business. And with the market the way it is, we think we can get top dollar. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob to the kitchen. He was on the phone. It was late. Yeah, 4 bedrooms, he continued, plus the downstairs guest room, which would make a perfect office. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It's recently become available. We're planning to list in the next couple of months, as soon as we get a little family matter settled. The sooner, the better, honestly. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My room. He was talking about my room. Recently become available. A little family matter. The words echoed in the silent house, each one a hammer blow against the fragile structure of my new life. The in-law suite, the blueprints, the promises of a shared future. It was all a lie. A grand, elaborate performance designed for one purpose: to get my money. They weren't investing in a bigger home for our family. They were using my life savings to do a cheap cosmetic renovation on their house so they could flip it for a bigger profit. And I was the family matter that needed to be settled. Shipped off to a nursing home, most likely, the brochures for which were probably already tucked away in a drawer. I stumbled back to my room, my heart a block of ice in my chest. I didn't get a glass of water. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, my body trembling with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the house. The shock was so profound, it was almost paralyzing. It wasn't just that they didn't want me here. It was the premeditation, the cold, reptilian calculus of it all. They had watched me grieve my husband, my loneliness, and had seen not a mother in pain, but an opportunity. A mark. And I, in my grief and my desperate need for family, had walked right into their trap. The self-blame was a suffocating wave. How could I have been so stupid, so naive, so blind? I had sold my home, given away my future, and handed my heart to a son who saw me as nothing more than a barrier to a real estate transaction. For the next 3 days, I was an actress. I moved through their house, a ghost in my own life, observing them with a new, horrifying clarity. I was a scientist studying a foreign species, and the subject of my study was the complete and utter stranger who was my son. Every "I love you, Mom" was a line of dialogue, every hug a piece of stage business. Sarah's bright, brittle smiles were the mask of a co-conspirator. They would ask how I slept, and I would say, "Just fine," while the truth was, I hadn't slept at all, lying awake in the dark, their casual cruelty replaying in my mind on an endless loop. The initial shock, the feeling of the world having dropped out from under me, began to recede. In its place, a cold, hard anger started to form, like ice crystallizing on a winter pond. It was a quiet, clean anger, devoid of the messy histrionics they probably expected from me if I ever found out. The pain was still there, a deep, cavernous ache, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was becoming fuel. My mind, which had been fogged with grief and naivete, started to clear. It was time to count my losses, to fully comprehend the scale of the wreckage. The biggest loss was not the house. The house was just wood and nails, a container for memories I still owned. The biggest loss was not even the money, though the sum was staggering, representing a lifetime of work and careful saving by me and my late husband. The greatest, most irreplaceable loss was the son I thought I had. The boy I had raised, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose report cards I had celebrated, was gone. Or perhaps he had never really existed at all. This man, Michael, was a predator who had used my love and trust as his primary weapons. This realization was the turning point. It was the moment I transitioned from the emotional pain of a victim to the rational mindset of a survivor. My awakening demanded action, not tears. I needed proof, something more concrete than a half-overheard phone call. The opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon when Michael and Sarah took Lily to a dentist appointment across town. They told me they would be gone for at least 3 hours. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I went straight to Michael's office. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was firm. I started with his desk drawers. In the back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found them. It wasn't one brochure, but a half-dozen of them. Golden Years Senior Living, Evergreen Assisted Care, Willow Creek Residence. They were all glossy, filled with pictures of smiling, white-haired seniors playing bingo. A yellow sticky note was attached to one of them in Sarah's neat, precise handwriting. It had a list of phone numbers and a note. Call RE, Medicaid eligibility. They weren't just planning to put me in a home. They were planning to do it on the state's dime after they had drained my own resources. The next discovery was in a folder labeled House. There were no blueprints for an in-law suite. Instead, there were invoices and estimates. One from a painter for a neutral color palette refresh. One from a landscaper for maximizing curb appeal. And one from a kitchen contractor for new countertops, quartz, not the high-end marble Sarah had dreamed of, a cheaper option for a quick flip. It was all there, in black and white. Their plan was not to build, but to polish. To put just enough lipstick on their pig of a house to sell it and walk away with my money. I took out my phone and, with trembling hands, I photographed every single document. The brochures, the invoices, the sticky note. I was building a case. As I worked, the fear and sadness were replaced by a cold, methodical rage. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was a detective, an archivist of my own betrayal. This was the moment the bond with my son broke. It didn't just fray. It was severed, cauterized by the white-hot heat of my newfound knowledge. My love for him, a vast and unconditional thing, had been revealed as a liability, a weakness he had expertly exploited. That weakness was now gone. Choosing myself, my survival, was the only option left. I couldn't stay in that house another night. It was a cage, and I had to get out before they returned and sensed the change in me. My mind raced. I needed a safe harbor, a place to think and plan. I called my oldest friend, Clara, a woman I hadn't spoken to in months, another casualty of my self-imposed isolation after Richard's death. "Clara," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm in trouble. Can I come and stay with you for a while?" There was no hesitation in her voice, only warmth and concern. "Of course, Maggie. What's wrong? Where are you?" "I'll explain when I get there," I said. "I have to leave now." I packed a single suitcase, just the essentials. As a final act before leaving, I walked back into Michael's office. I looked at the brochures for the nursing homes, still fanned out on his desk. I took the one on top, Golden Years, and placed it in the very center of his leather desk blotter, right where he couldn't miss it. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. The brochure was a message. It said, "I know." I walked out of that house without looking back. It wasn't a hysterical flight. It was a calm, firm, deliberate escape. I was not a victim running away. I was a prisoner, walking out of an unlocked cell. I was choosing myself, and in doing so, I was finally breaking free. Clara's guest room felt like a 5-star hotel suite after the claustrophobic confines of my son's house. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I spent the first evening unloading the whole sordid story, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent of pain and anger. Clara listened, her face a mask of horrified disbelief that slowly hardened into a fierce, protective loyalty. She poured me a glass of wine, then another, and by the end of the night, we had moved from tears to strategy. Her home was not just a refuge, it was a war room. The counterattack from Michael and Sarah began the next morning. It wasn't a physical invasion, but a psychological one, waged over the telephone lines. The first call was from Michael. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a masterpiece of feigned concern. "Mom? Where are you? We came home and you were gone. We're worried sick. Please just call us and let us know you're safe." The discovery of the Golden Years brochure had clearly spooked them, but they were not yet ready to admit they knew I was onto them. They were still playing the part of the loving, worried children. I didn't call back. Clara and I had decided my first move was silence. Let them sweat. Let them wonder what I knew and what I was planning. The calls continued throughout the day, escalating in frequency and tone. By the afternoon, the feigned concern had begun to curdle into irritation. Sarah called next. Her approach was different, an attempt at gentle, manipulative shaming. "Maggie," she said, using my first name in a way that was meant to sound familiar, but came across as condescending. "Michael is a wreck. You've really upset him. We've done so much for you, taken you into our home, and you just disappear without a word? It's not fair to us, Maggie. It's really not." They were already spinning the narrative, casting me as the ungrateful, unstable matriarch who was causing them distress. They took my pain, a direct result of their actions, and repackaged it as an inconvenience to them. The audacity was stunning. By evening, the gloves came off. Michael called again, and this time I answered, putting the phone on speaker so Clara could hear. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice stripped of all pretense of warmth. "I'm safe," I said calmly, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I needed some time to think." "Think about what?" he shot back. "Think about how you're going to repay all the trouble you're causing? We had plans, Mom. Things were in motion." He had slipped. In his anger, he was admitting that I was an obstacle to his plans. "Oh, I'm well aware of your plans, Michael," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "I believe they're glossy, full color, and have titles like Evergreen Assisted Care." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a sputtering silence. I had laid my card on the table. The game was out in the open. Sarah must have grabbed the phone from him because her voice, sharp and venomous, suddenly filled the room. "You have no right to go through our things. What is wrong with you? We were looking into those places for your own good. You've been so forgetful lately, so confused. We're worried you're not capable of making decisions for yourself anymore." There it was. The foundation for their next attack. My supposed mental incompetence. They weren't just thieves, they were character assassins. They were prepared to declare me senile to get what they wanted. The accusations and manipulations continued. They told me I was being selfish, that I was throwing away my chance to be with my family, my only grandchild. They tried to leverage Lily, telling me how much she missed her grandma, how confused she was that I had just abandoned her. Every word was a carefully chosen weapon designed to inflict maximum guilt and emotional distress. Then came the threats. They were veiled, but the intent was clear. "If you don't come back, Mom," Michael said, his voice low and menacing. "We're going to have to explore our options. We have a responsibility to make sure you're cared for, even if you can't see it yourself. We might have to talk to a doctor, maybe even a lawyer, to get you the help you need." The threat of a forced conservatorship, of having my rights stripped away and being declared legally incompetent, hung in the air. They were threatening to use the money I had given them to hire a lawyer to imprison me, medically and financially. It was the ultimate betrayal, a move so cruel and calculating that it took my breath away. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were trying to steal my very self, my autonomy, my sanity. The invasion was complete. They had breached the walls of my home, my finances, and now they were laying siege to my mind. The threat of conservatorship was meant to be the final blow, the move that would send me scurrying back to their house, defeated and compliant. They imagined I would be terrified, a helpless old woman isolated from her family, easily intimidated by legal jargon and the specter of a court-appointed guardian. They expected me to crumble. They had fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. Their cruelty had not broken me. It had forged me into something new, something hard and unyielding. Clara, who had been listening to the entire exchange with a look of murderous rage on her face, simply said, "The bastards." Her unwavering support was an anchor in the storm they had created. I was not alone, and I was not afraid. When they called the next day, I was ready. I had spent the morning talking with Clara, rehearsing my responses, building my defenses. My defiance would not be loud or hysterical. It would be cold, calm, and absolute. Sarah was the one who called, her voice once again dripping with a cloying, false sweetness. "Maggie, honey, we've had some time to cool down. I think we all said things we didn't mean yesterday. Why don't you just come home and we can talk this all out, like a family?" It was a classic abuser's tactic. Minimize the conflict, pretend the threats were never made, and lure the victim back into the cycle. "There's nothing to talk about, Sarah," I said, my voice a placid, untroubled lake. "My coming home is no longer an option." "Don't be silly," she said with a light, dismissive laugh. "Of course it is. This is all just a big misunderstanding. Your room is waiting for you." "Is it?" I asked, a hint of steel in my voice. "Or has it, as Michael told the Realtor, recently become available?" Her silence was my confirmation. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to formulate a new lie. "You twist everything, Maggie. Michael was just exploring possibilities for the distant future. It meant nothing." "It meant everything," I stated flatly. "And I am not coming back. Not now, not ever. Consider this my formal notice that I have moved out." My calm, unarguable finality seemed to unnerve her. She was used to emotional reactions she could manipulate. This placid wall of refusal was something she didn't know how to scale. Michael called an hour later, taking a different approach. Anger and bluster. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Mom? You can't just move out. We have an arrangement. You're living under our roof." "No, Michael," I corrected him gently. "I was living under your roof. I am no longer. And our arrangement was based on a fraudulent premise. I believe that legally voids the contract, don't you?" I was parroting a phrase Clara and I had looked up online, and it felt incredibly empowering to use it. His sputtering rage was music to my ears. He was losing control, and he knew it. "You're not well, Mom. You're being influenced. That friend of yours, Clara, she's putting ideas in your head. We're going to have to take steps." "You do what you feel you have to do, Michael," I said, my tone bordering on bored. This was the key to my defiance. I refused to be drawn into his drama. I treated his threats not as terrifying prospects, but as the desperate flailing of a man who had lost the upper hand. I, however, will also be taking steps. I suggest you wait to hear from my legal counsel. I hung up before he could respond. The act of hanging up on him, of severing the connection on my own terms, was a small but deeply significant victory. I was establishing a new boundary, a hard line he could not cross. They tried one more time that week, a joint call where they both got on the line, attempting to overwhelm me. They cycled through all their tactics: guilt, accusations of senility, veiled threats, and even tearful pleas. But I was immune. Their words were like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. "We love you, Mom," Michael said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We just want what's best for you." "No, Michael," I said, my voice calm and clear, the voice of a woman who had finally found her footing. "You want what's best for you. There was a time I would have confused the two. That time is over. That was the last time I spoke to them. I blocked their numbers. I blocked Sarah's email. I instructed Clara to tell them, if they ever showed up at her door, that I was not there and that the police would be called if they trespassed. The invasion had been total, their psychological warfare relentless. But they had laid siege to a city that was no longer there. I had already evacuated. My defiance was not in fighting them on their terms, but in refusing to fight at all. I simply withdrew my consent to be their victim. In the profound silence that followed, a silence I had chosen and created, I began to plot my counterattack. The decision to defend myself was not a single moment of revelation, but a conclusion reached after days of quiet, focused anger. I had defied their psychological invasion, but that was a defensive victory. It was not enough to simply escape. They had stolen my sense of security, my trust, and a significant portion of my life savings. Justice required more than just my absence from their lives. It required accountability. It required that I fight back. Clara, my steadfast general in this unfolding war, had a nephew who was a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, she'd explained, but a bulldog who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. His name was Ben Carter. Making the call to him was the first concrete, offensive step I took. It felt like picking up a weapon. Our first meeting took place in a small, unassuming office that smelled of old books and fresh coffee. Ben Carter was younger than I expected, probably in his late 30s, with a sharp, focused energy and eyes that seemed to take in every detail. I had brought my evidence with me: the photos of the nursing home brochures and the contractor's invoices, a written timeline of events, and the approximate amount of the check I had written to Michael. Like Eleanor Vance in my previous life story, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered something better: validation. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his expression growing more grim with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze steely. "This is textbook," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet intensity. "They isolate the target, usually after a significant life event like the death of a spouse. They prey on loneliness and the desire for family. They commingle funds under the guise of a shared future, and then they pull the rug out. What your son and his wife have done is not just morally reprehensible, Maggie. It's fraud." The word fraud landed with the force of a judge's gavel. It gave a name to their betrayal, transforming it from a messy family drama into a prosecutable offense. "They threatened to pursue a conservatorship," I told him, my voice tight. "They said I was confused, incompetent. Ben's lips tightened into a thin, angry line. That's the classic nuclear option. They try to discredit the victim before the victim can expose the crime. It rarely works when the incompetent person has the presence of mind to hire a lawyer. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. We're going to hit them first, and we're going to hit them hard. His plan was simple, direct, and brilliant. The check I had given Michael was my weapon. I had written in the memo line, for in-law suite construction. It was a small detail I had almost forgotten, but to Ben, it was gold. There was no gift tax form filed, was there? He asked. I shook my head. Of course not. Because this wasn't a gift. The memo line on that check, combined with your testimony and the lack of a formal gift declaration, establishes this as a verbal contract. You provided funds for a specific purpose, the construction of a home for you to live in. They took the funds and not only failed to deliver on the contract, but actively conspired to use the funds for another purpose, defrauding you and then abandoning you. They are in breach of contract. This was my first action. It was not a lawsuit, not yet. It was a formal demand letter drafted by Ben on his firm's letterhead. It was a legal shot across the bow. The letter was a masterpiece of cold, legal precision. It laid out the facts: the sale of my house, the transfer of funds for the specific purpose of an in-law suite, and their subsequent actions, which demonstrated a clear intent to defraud. It cited the evidence I had found, including the discussions with the Realtor and the collection of nursing home brochures. The letter concluded with a non-negotiable demand: the full and immediate return of the entire sum I had given them, plus interest, within 30 days. If the funds were not returned by the deadline, the letter stated, we would immediately file a civil suit for breach of contract, fraud, and punitive damages. Furthermore, we would forward our findings to the district attorney's office for a potential criminal investigation into felony elder abuse and financial exploitation. We sent the letter via certified mail, requiring Michael's signature upon receipt. I imagined him signing for it, casually, thinking it was some piece of junk mail. I imagined him opening the envelope, his face draining of color as he read the cold, hard, legal prose detailing his crimes. This was not a hysterical phone call from his mother. This was the full weight of the law coming down on his head. The act of sending that letter was profoundly liberating. I was no longer a victim hiding in a friend's house. I was a plaintiff, a force to be reckoned with. I had taken the first step in reclaiming not just my money, but my power. The self-blame that had haunted me in the beginning was gone, burned away by the clean fire of action. They had started this. They had awakened a strength in me I never knew I possessed. And I was just getting started. The demand letter landed in their world with the force of an explosion. The 30-day deadline began to tick down, a relentless clock counting away the seconds of their comfortable, stolen life. For 2 weeks, there was a profound and telling silence. I imagined the frantic, whispered conversations, the panicked calls to their own lawyers, the dawning, sickening realization that the confused old woman they had so casually dismissed was now holding a legal sword to their throats. They had spent a portion of the money, of course, on their debts, on the cosmetic repairs, on their inflated lifestyle. They couldn't simply write a check and make this go away. They were trapped. When the countermove came, it was exactly what Ben had predicted. They didn't respond through a lawyer. They attempted to circumvent the legal process entirely and appeal to the one thing they believed they could still manipulate: my emotions. They tried to tempt me with a fantasy of reconciliation. Michael appeared at Clara's front door, unannounced. Clara, forewarned, spoke to him through the intercom. "She doesn't want to see you, Michael." "Please," he begged, and the desperation in his voice was audible even through the tinny speaker. "I just need to talk to her. 5 minutes. It's important." Against my better judgment, but with a cold curiosity to see his performance, I agreed to see him. But on my terms. We met in a neutral location, the bleak, impersonal lobby of a budget hotel near Clara's house. I didn't want him anywhere near my sanctuary. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. The smug, confident son who had patronizingly explained why I needed to sell my house was gone. In his place was a cornered animal. He tried to hug me when I walked in, but I sidestepped him and sat in one of the stiff, uninviting armchairs, leaving a wide coffee table between us. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking, "we got the letter. This is all a horrible mistake." I said nothing. I just watched him, my expression unreadable. "You misunderstood what you heard," he pleaded, leaning forward earnestly. "The realtor, that was just an appraisal. Sarah and I were just curious what the house was worth for insurance purposes. And the brochures. We were just looking, Mom, trying to be prepared for the future, for your future. We want to take care of you. That's all we've ever wanted." The lies were so transparent, so insulting in their clumsiness, that it was almost pitiable. He was trying to gaslight me, to convince me that the reality I had uncovered was just a figment of my confused imagination. He was betting that a part of me still wanted to believe him, that the mother inside me would cling to any plausible explanation, no matter how flimsy. "So you were planning to take care of me in a Medicaid-funded facility after spending my life savings on your kitchen countertops?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. He flinched as if I had struck him. "No, it wasn't like that. We were going to build the suite. The permits were just delayed." "We love you, Mom. This legal stuff, it's tearing our family apart. It's tearing me apart." He actually managed to produce a tear, which tracked a pathetic, glistening path down his cheek. This was the temptation. He was offering me an exit ramp from the ugly, confrontational path I was on. He was offering a return to the fantasy, the loving son, the caring family, the peaceful life. All I had to do was call off the lawyer, tear up the demand letter, and pretend none of this had ever happened. All I had to do was swallow the poison of his betrayal and call it a misunderstanding. But the woman he was talking to had developed an immunity to his particular brand of poison. I looked at my son, at his desperate, play-acted remorse, and I felt nothing. The maternal bond, once the strongest force in my life, had been so thoroughly corroded by his actions that nothing of it remained. All I saw was a weak, greedy man trying to squirm his way out of the consequences of his own choices. My rejection was cold, quiet, and absolute. "The time for talking is over, Michael," I said, my voice as flat and hard as the marble floor of the lobby. "You seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. This is a debt collection. You can either pay the debt you owe me, or you can explain your actions to a judge. Those are your only two options." "But I'm your son," he whispered, his last desperate appeal. "My son," I replied, standing up, "would not have done this to me. I don't know who you are." I turned and walked out of the lobby without looking back. I did not feel a shred of sadness or regret. The temptation he offered was a return to a prison I had just escaped. My freedom, my emotional, financial, and psychological freedom, was not something I was willing to trade for a hollow, counterfeit version of love. My course was set, and there was no turning back. Rejecting Michael's pathetic attempt at manipulation was a victory, but I knew the real battle lay ahead. The 30-day deadline on the demand letter would expire, and they would not pay. A lawsuit was inevitable. Ben had warned me that they would fight dirty, that their primary strategy would be to attack my character and credibility. To withstand that, I needed more than just a good lawyer and my own resolve. I needed a community. Clara was my rock, my daily source of sanity and encouragement, but she could only understand my situation from the outside. I needed to connect with women who had lived it, who had walked through the same fire and understood the unique pain of being betrayed by their own children. I found them, as so many do in this digital age, online. I found a forum, similar to the Phoenix Project, this one called The Hearth. It was a private group for parents who had experienced financial exploitation by their adult children. Sharing my story there was like opening a pressure valve. I wrote it all out, from the initial pleas to sell my house to the final chilling threat of a conservatorship. I posted it, my heart pounding, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The response was a tidal wave of support and recognition. "The 'we're worried about you' line is straight from the manipulator's playbook," one woman wrote. My daughter said the same thing right before she cleaned out my bank account. Another commented, "The sudden move to declare you incompetent when you fight back? I've been there. My son tried to get power of attorney by claiming I had dementia. The judge saw right through him." Dozens of stories poured in, each one a different shade of the same ugly color. Women who had co-signed on loans, who had put their children's names on the deeds to their homes, who had given away their inheritances, all under the illusion of helping the family. We were a secret sorority of the betrayed, a club no one ever wanted to join. But here, in this anonymous space, we were not victims. We were survivors. We shared legal strategies, recommended lawyers, and, most importantly, we validated each other's sanity. We were not crazy. We were not ungrateful. We were the targets of a specific and insidious form of abuse. This mutual recognition was a powerful antidote to the gaslighting I had endured. This newfound sense of solidarity fueled a deep need for a spiritual and physical cleansing, a way to shed the last remnants of the person I had been. My life was in limbo, living out of a suitcase in Clara's guest room. I needed a space of my own, a tangible symbol of my new, independent life. I couldn't afford to buy anything yet, not until my money was recovered, but I could rent. The process of apartment hunting became a sacred ritual. I wasn't just looking for a place to live, I was looking for a place to be reborn. I explored neighborhoods I had only ever driven through, places far from the suburban world Michael and Sarah inhabited. I found a small, charming one-bedroom apartment in a vibrant, walkable part of the city, with a balcony that overlooked a community garden. It was the opposite of my old, sprawling house. It was compact, efficient, and entirely for me. Signing the lease was a more powerful declaration of independence than any legal document. While waiting for the move-in date, I began to shed the outer vestiges of Michael's mother. I went through the clothes I had packed, donating the bland, sensible outfits I had worn for years. In their place, I bought a few new things in bright colors and bold patterns, clothes that made me feel visible, not invisible. I went to a salon and had my hair cut into a chic, short style I had always admired, but never had the courage to try. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was no longer a sad, grieving widow. She was a stranger, and I liked her. She looked like a fighter. The final act of cleansing was to create a war chest. I took what was left of my personal savings, the small account that Michael hadn't known about, and I made a budget. I allocated funds for my rent, my living expenses, and most importantly, for Ben's legal fees. Organizing my finances, taking control of every dollar, was an act of reclaiming my power. Michael and Sarah had seen me as a resource to be drained. Now I was my own resource, funding my own liberation. When moving day arrived, Clara helped me. I had almost nothing to move: a few suitcases of clothes, some books, and a box of photographs of Richard and my parents. The apartment was empty, a blank canvas. As I stood in the middle of the empty living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the glass doors to the balcony, I didn't feel a sense of loss for the grand house I had left behind. I felt a sense of boundless possibility. I was starting over from scratch, with nothing but my own strength and the support of a few good women, and it was enough. This empty room was the first page of the rest of my life. The 30-day deadline on the demand letter expired without a response. As Ben had predicted, they were calling our bluff, hoping I would lose my nerve. They were mistaken. The day after the deadline passed, Ben filed the civil lawsuit. The official summons was served to Michael at his office, a deliberate move to maximize his humiliation. The lawsuit was for breach of contract, fraudulent misrepresentation, and financial elder abuse. We weren't just asking for my money back. We were seeking punitive damages for the emotional distress and the calculated nature of their scheme. The lawsuit was a declaration of war, and their response was a scorched earth campaign to destroy my reputation. They couldn't fight us on the facts. The evidence of the forged document and financial trail was too strong. So, they attacked me. They launched a coordinated campaign of slander among our extended family and the community of friends we had once shared. The narrative they spun was insidious and cleverly constructed. They portrayed themselves as the dutiful children of a mother who was tragically descending into dementia. They claimed I was paranoid, delusional, and being manipulated by my greedy friend Clara and an unscrupulous lawyer who were trying to steal my money. They twisted my grief over Richard's death into a sign of mental instability. My act of selling the house was reframed not as their idea, but as my own erratic decision. The resistance I faced was deeply personal and painful. My sister-in-law, Richard's sister, called me, her voice filled with a pity that was worse than any anger. She told me she had heard from Michael that she was so sorry to hear I was unwell and that I should stop this awful legal action and let my family take care of me. I tried to explain the truth, but her mind was already poisoned. She heard my calm, rational explanation as further proof of my cunning delusion. I received emails from old friends, people who had danced at my wedding, urging me to reconcile with my wonderful son. Each message was a small cut, a reminder of how effectively Michael and Sarah had isolated me. They had turned my own social network against me, using people's genuine concern as a weapon. But my time with Clara and the women from the hearth had prepared me for this. I had been inoculated against their poison. My resistance was quiet and steadfast. I refused to engage in the drama. I did not call relatives to plead my case. I did not send angry emails defending my sanity. I simply forwarded every accusatory message to Ben, who filed them away as evidence of their campaign of harassment. My primary form of resistance was my composure. I attended the preliminary court hearings and the depositions looking calm, healthy, and impeccably put together. I answered their lawyers' probing, insulting questions with a quiet dignity and an unshakable command of the facts. When he tried to imply I was a forgetful old woman, I produced a detailed day-by-day journal I had started keeping since the night I overheard the phone call. When he suggested I had given the money as a gift, I calmly referred him to the memo line on the check. The starkest contrast was between my demeanor and theirs. Michael was a nervous wreck in his deposition, constantly contradicting himself, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Sarah was brittle and hostile, her carefully constructed facade of the perfect daughter-in-law cracking under pressure, revealing the raw greed and anger beneath. They tried to use my new apartment and my new haircut against me, their lawyer suggesting I was on a frivolous spending spree with money that should be preserved for my care. Ben shut him down immediately. Are you suggesting, counsel, that a woman is not entitled to spend her own money on housing and personal grooming? Or is that a privilege reserved only for your clients, who spent my clients' money on quartz countertops and their own personal debts? I resisted the urge to be intimidated. I resisted the urge to weep with rage at their lies. I focused on the truth, on the documents, on the clear, cold facts of the case. They were trying to create a storm of chaos and emotion around me, hoping I would drown in it. But I was not in the storm. I was the storm. And my new attack, the methodical, relentless legal process, was slowly and surely eroding the very ground beneath their feet. Their desperation culminated in a final, pathetic act of sabotage. It was their last stand, a move so audacious and foolish it could only have been born from the minds of people who saw no other way out. Days before the scheduled trial, their lawyer submitted a motion for an emergency conservatorship hearing, claiming my mental state had severely deteriorated. As evidence, they submitted a signed letter from a psychiatrist, a Dr. Alistair Finch, who attested that he had met with me and found me to be suffering from severe paranoia and early-onset dementia, rendering me incapable of managing my own affairs. It was a blatant, outrageous lie. I had never met or even heard of Dr. Alistair Finch. This was their checkmate move, a forged medical document designed to strip me of my rights and end the lawsuit in one fell swoop. This final attack was their undoing. Ben, my lawyer, was practically gleeful. "Amateurs," he muttered, shaking his head. "They've just handed us the case on a silver platter, tied with a bow." The forgery was laughably easy to disprove. Ben's investigator discovered that Dr. Alistair Finch was a real psychiatrist, but he was a childhood friend of Sarah's father. A subpoena of the doctor's appointment records and a sworn affidavit from his receptionist confirmed I had never been a patient. Furthermore, we had travel receipts and a signed statement from Clara, proving that on the day I had supposedly met with Dr. Finch in the city, I was actually on a weekend hiking trip with her, 3 hours away. They had committed perjury and conspired to defraud the court. The defeat of my rivals was swift and merciless. When presented with the evidence of the forgery, their case didn't just collapse, it vaporized. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, was livid. She threw out their motion and took the unprecedented step of sanctioning both them and their lawyer for filing a fraudulent document. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the looming threat of criminal charges, they had no choice but to surrender. They agreed to a settlement. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a capitulation. They had to repay every single cent I had given them. They had to pay all of my legal fees, which were substantial. And they had to pay an additional, significant sum in punitive damages. My victory was not just a win, it was a conquest. The financial blow was catastrophic for them. To pay the settlement, they had to sell their house immediately. But in their rush to liquidate, and with the cloud of a lawsuit hanging over the property, They had to sell it for far less than they had hoped. The profits they had schemed to make from my money vanished, eaten up by what they owed me. The quartz countertops I had paid for were enjoyed by a new family. The personal fallout was even more devastating. Sarah, who had hitched her wagon to a man she believed was a clever operator, saw him revealed as a foolish, clumsy criminal. She could not tolerate the public humiliation and the drastic downturn in their financial fortunes. She left him, taking Lily with her and filing for a divorce that would strip him of what little he had left. Michael, my son, lost everything: his wife, his child, his home, his reputation, and the mother he had so carelessly discarded. I, on the other hand, had gained everything back. With my finances restored, I bought the charming little apartment I had been renting. I poured my energy and my newfound freedom into making it my own. I took a landscape design course at the local community college, a passion I had suppressed for decades. I filled my balcony with flowers and herbs, creating a small, perfect oasis in the middle of the city. My life was quiet, full, and blissfully free of their drama. A year to the day after the settlement check cleared, a thick, handwritten envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was from Michael. I opened it, a detached, clinical curiosity my only emotion. The letter was a long, rambling litany of his failures. He had a low-wage job. He lived in a dreary apartment. Sarah rarely let him see Lily. It was filled with pleas for forgiveness, for a second chance, for a way back into my life. He wrote that he finally understood what he had lost. I read the letter, standing in my sun-drenched living room, surrounded by the life I had built for myself. I felt no anger, no pity, no lingering maternal pull. The person he was writing to no longer existed. I walked over to the paper shredder I kept in my small home office. I fed the letter into the slot, and with a satisfying mechanical whine, his words, his excuses, and his pathetic pleas were turned into a cascade of meaningless, cross-cut strips. I emptied the small bin into the trash. Then I went out to my balcony, picked up my watering can, and tended to my flowers. The sun was warm, the air was fresh, and my life was my own. The victory was absolute, and it was complete.